Today we're going to talk about one of the most popular tools used in the field of database hacking or security assessment for databases. It is the SQLmap. And in today's tutorial, before I go into the different command line switches used in SQLmap, I'm going first to explain what is SQLmap, how it is used, and the methodology of using SQLmap. First, let's start with the use cases. Why do you use SQLmap? Mainly, SQLmap is used for database security assessments. But the term database security assessments span a wide range of assessments. What kind of assessment are we looking for here? It is the SQL injection vulnerability. So mainly it's used to test a database for SQL injection. Okay, now before I go into methodology, let's talk about the databases or database software supported. So as you know guys, databases run on software, and there are different kinds of software used to operate databases. Now remember that here we are talking about SQL databases. SQLmap does not cover NoSQL databases. Okay, we're not going to talk about this. SQLmap covers databases or SQL databases. Okay, that's a very important distinction to remember. Now let's talk about the software supported or the types of software supported by SQLmap. As you can see here, there are many software supported. We have MySQL, which is used mainly with Apache Web Server, Oracle, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, Microsoft Access, along with many more database software. These database software used to operate SQL databases, and they are widely used to run databases for all sorts of websites around the globe. So next, we're going to talk about the methodology. How do we start assessing the security of a database? As you know guys, we're going to have first to start with the enumeration. We have to gather information about the structure of the database. Sure, most of you know how to use SQLmap, and most of you know that we can run SQLmap for one time to just do everything, dump the credentials, have an OS access. But in real world scenarios, we're going to have first to run the enumeration. It's very beneficial to have a grasp on the database structure, database information, the rows and columns. And next, after we glean these information, we can choose what to do. Mainly after we enumerate, most penetration testers choose to dump credentials. Say that they locate a database and the database contains a table named users. Okay, now pen testers would attempt to dump the credentials from the users table. These may include passwords, hashes, usernames, full names, emails. It depends on the information stored in the said database. Now, one step further penetration testers often take is to attempt to have an OS access, meaning they try to establish a shell access or have a shell on the system. You may have heard the term, it is from SQL to OS. Probably you have heard this a lot, where an attacker uses SQL vulnerability to access the underlying operating system and have the first shell. That can be accomplished using SQLmap, but not in all scenarios, okay? Because OS shell is not guaranteed to work all the time. Okay, now we talked about the use cases, methodology, and database software supported. Let's talk about the input, okay? So how do we get SQLmap to do all of this magic? We have two methods. We can either supply SQLmap with the URL that contains the vulnerable parameter. Now, mostly URLs like that, for example, as you can see, example.com, product 14. So this is an example of a URL that we can supply to SQLmap, and here we put a star indicating that we don't know what is the vulnerable parameter here. Sometimes we know the vulnerable parameter, and it comes in the form of, let me look for an example here. Okay, this is an example of a URL that you can also supply to SQLmap. Okay, now it doesn't contain the ID. Sometimes the ID comes like this. So you have a login page, or say maybe an example.com, and then you have a question mark, ID equal, or maybe whatever, ID equal 1. So in this case, the vulnerable parameter is ID equal 1. Okay, so you have to supply this to SQLmap. If you don't know the ID, you can just type the star indicating that the vulnerable parameter is not clear to you. Okay, let me get this back to how it was before. Okay, so the first thing is we supply the URL. Now the other thing here, we can supply a text file containing the post get request. So sometimes SQL injection vulnerabilities manifest in login forms. So you have a login form, and in the login form you have here username and you have passwords. Login form to supply the username and password. So here you don't know what is the parameter. Sometimes it could be the user or the password that is vulnerable to SQL injection, but you don't know it or you're not sure. What we're going to do, you use a tool such as Perp Suite to capture a request to the login form, and then store this in a file and supply the file to the SQLmap. Now mainly we can control these two options depending on the scenario. So basically, first, if you want to supply a file, all you have to do is to use the option -r with SQLmap. -r, and then along with the file name. Usually the file comes in text format. If you don't want to supply a file containing the request, then you have to supply the URL as shown in this example here. You use the option -u and supply the URL. Okay, now let's have a practical example and see how this works. SQLmap -h. If you are new to SQLmap, use the help menu to get yourself familiar with the various command line options. Here you can see all sorts of options, starting with the help, and here how to supply the target. You can supply the target, as you can see, either with a URL, as we have discussed earlier, or using a request file. Now the injection here, -p, if you know what is the parameter, you supply the parameter with -p. So say here, let's go back to the previous example. Here we put an asterisk because we don't know what is the parameter, but if we happen to know the parameter, such as maybe example.com index, and then we have ID equal 1. In this case, we can supply the URL like that with the option -u, and then we supply with -p the parameter, indicating the parameter name. If you don't want to do that, you can just supply the URL along with the vulnerable parameter. And you can explore all the other options. Here are the enumeration options that we can use to enumerate the database. It's always a good idea to start with the enumeration first. Okay, let's have an example here. So I have prepared a request file. As you can see, this request has been captured using Perp Suite. So I sent a request to a web page. The web page contains a login form. And as you can see, the request that I have sent to this page. Notice here that we down here, line 15, we have the username and we have the password that have been sent in the login form. So I supplied test as the username and test as the password. And I hit send, copied the request, stored it in the file, and then I have the request ready here. It's supposed to request because this is a login form. This is a request to a login form. Now what I have to do, we can go back to SQLmap, and then we choose the option -r. -r because here the request, I have a file, and then I supply the -- maybe banner. We start with banner grabbing. Let's see here, what's the problem? Not authorized, start to provide the right HTTP authentication. All right, let's try with this command. So here 401, we ignore the not authorized code and we supply the, or we enter. Right, so we have a, it looks like the backend DBMS is MySQL. Do you want to skip test payloads specific for other DBMSs? All right, since SQLmap was able to identify the database backend, it's safe to skip other tests. You don't want to waste time doing tests on a database that could be a database used for production servers. If you do that, you will just exhaust the database resources during a real pen test. So skip that with no. And then here we have for the remaining tests, do you want to include all tests for MySQL extending provided level 1? And that depends on the scenario. But for this scenario, because it's a simple scenario, I'm gonna hit no. Okay, let's have a look at this. Post parameter username is MySQL, larger than 51 and error paste. Okay, so here it's telling you that the username parameter is vulnerable to an error based SQL injection. Post parameter username appears to be, and it's also vulnerable to time based. Now, if you are wondering what are these sorts of SQL injection, then you have to stop this video and go to my video where I have explained the SQL injection and the types of SQL injection vulnerabilities. You can see the video in the screen card. Do you want to retry, find proper union column types with fuzzy test? No, it's not. I just want the banner of the database. Target URL appears to be union injectable with one columns. Post parameter username is vulnerable. Do you want to keep testing the others? We don't need to do that. We can hit N or no. And we have a brief on the SQL injection vulnerabilities found. So first we have an error based, right? And we also have time based blind. Okay. And here are the payloads that SQLmap used to detect these vulnerabilities. You can try this payload out yourself manually using the browser if you want. Now let's skip to the most important piece of information we want or we are after, which is the backend database. As you can see, the backend DBMS is Maria database. That's the first useful piece of information we want to learn about database. It's MariaDB. Okay, next we can opt to enumerate the tables. So we can use the option -- tables, and here it will try to fetch all the tables. It's gonna take some time. That's why I'm gonna stop this and go to the very first. Before it lists the tables, it first searches for the available databases. As you can see, fetching database names, and we have the available databases, information schema, test, and corp_terminal. And after that, SQLmap will attempt to enumerate and list the tables for each one of these databases. Now, if you don't want to waste your time on databases you don't want to enumerate, you can stop the testing after you see the databases, and then you can focus your search or the enumeration on the specific database you want to test. Let's say we want to test the -d corp. Let me make sure of the case sensitivity here. So it is lowercase k. And here I'm going to choose -- tables. Okay. See, this option will enumerate the tables stored in this database, corp_terminal. And because the database is vulnerable to these SQL injection vulnerabilities, I'm going to be successfully able to enumerate all of these sensitive information. So as you can see, corp_terminal or the corp terminal database has only one table found, which is users. Okay, as a pen tester, you'll want to dig deeper into the database structure. So here you only have one table to work with. And since database penetration testing is all about dumping credentials from the database after, of course, the enumeration, right? So to dump the entries here, we're gonna have to supply this command. Let's see here if I have run this command before. Nope. Okay, having the database specified using -d, I can specify the table name using $T, users, and then --dump. This will dump all the values stored in the table users, specifically the values stored in the columns of the users table. As you know, in databases, the tables such as users the table users has columns, right? The columns store the values. So when we type --dump, we are extracting the values from these columns. Let's see what we're gonna come up with. All right, let's go up here. See, all these are the columns found under the table users. We have the ID, the integer, which is the primary key, user name. No, this is the type of the column. We have username and we have password. So we have three columns: ID, username, and password. Let's take a look here. So we have the ID, password, and username. In this case, we have successfully dumped the hash and the admin username. So now, out of the scope of this video, you're gonna go ahead and crack this hash. Of course, this video will not talk about hash cracking because there are many videos where I talked about hash cracking. We can talk about this also in the future, but you can use Hashcat or John Draper. This looks like a bcrypt hash, judging by the opening of the hash. Okay. Now, what else you can do with SQLmap? Well, let's go back to the very beginning. So here, remember guys, when we run SQLmap first, we had to go through a couple of questions here so that SQLmap understands what we want to test or what we want to assess in this database. See, these answers I have provided were based on the scenario and my needs in this security testing. Now, if you are an experienced pen testers, or if you have assessed the security databases before, you're not going to have problem answering these questions or providing the guidance to SQLmap to continue the testing. But this is your first time and you are just practicing database penetration testing, SQLmap has an option. Let me first delete the log file created. Now there is an option here that will automate the process of answering all these questions on your behalf. All you have to do is to, again, supply the input, whether it is a request or a URL, and then supply the option dash dash batch. Dash dash batch will just try to answer the questions based on the data being retrieved from the database. That's right. See here, all the questions are being answered on your behalf. This one was answered with yes. This one was answered with yes. This may take some time because SQLmap now will test every single payload to detect all sorts of SQL injection vulnerabilities the database is vulnerable to, right? That's the downside of this kind of testing. I always prefer to go for the manual testing. I want to see every single question answered on my own, so that I don't waste time testing other payloads, where again, as I said earlier, testing these payloads may exhaust the resources of the server, because the server might be a production server if you are doing this as part of a real pen testing engagement. Okay, I'm gonna stop this now. All right, -os-shell. Let's see if this will work. And here we got this: which application language does the web server support? ASP, GSP, let's say it is PHP. Do you want SQLmap to further try to provoke the full path disclosure? Yep. Okay, let's see here. What do you want to use for writable directory? So here maybe SQLmap will attempt to write SSH keys or some payload to grant us the OS shell. It was asking, what do you want to use for writable directory? Common locations, let's see. We prefer to use temp here because it is the most likely directory where we can write files. Let's try with temp. So it is testing the directories, right, where it can store the shell. So probably it didn't work. We got the error unauthorized. So again, OS shell may work or may not work depending on the directory permissions on the target OS. If the permissions are correct, you might not be able to write an OS shell here. As you can see, we were not able to write any files to these directories because they have the correct permissions. Okay, what's another step? What's another option we can do to achieve an OS shell? We can write our own SSH keys. But first we have to guess what is the home directory. So back here, I can write my own SSH keys, right? And then using, of course, the -- file. And with destination, I can specify the destination on the target machine where it will store the public key of mine. Then I can log in with my private key. All right, now let's generate a pair of SSH keys. With this command, we can just do that. Enter the file in which to save the key. So this is the default location. Let's overwrite. Enter passphrase. No need for passphrase for now because it's for testing. Okay, now our public key has been saved in this directory. Okay, now the next step is to specify this file in the command. Let's go back to SQLmap and have a look at this. So -- file, write equal, specify the path of the public key, and then with -- file again, destination. All right, so here's the trick here. We have to guess what is the home directory in the target OS. Okay, now I know there are many tricks or many steps you can do to find out what is the user found or user stored in the target OS. But let's assume it is home MySQL SSH. Okay, so this one -write and here -destination. Do you want confirmation that the local file has been successfully written on the backend DBMS file? We're going to say yes. Let's see here. It looks like the file has not been written. We have an error code. Okay, it didn't work. As you can see, we got this unauthorized. That's something that you can expect during these kind of tests, because again, as I said earlier, these directories on the target OS may have the correct permissions, so they don't allow the other users to, or any user to write any file on them, or that this directory merely doesn't exist. Remember that here we are guessing the home directory. So these are the ways where you can test your ability to have an OS shell on the target. Now there is one last thing we can attempt here in order to have an OS shell. SQLmap -r request, and here we're going to use the option --dump -all, right? This will dump everything off the database, and then -os-shell. You can see I have run the test, and there are plethora of information that have been retrieved from all the databases since I chose to dump everything. Look at all this. Wow. If you're asking me, this test has taken around 48 minutes to finish. And as you can see, I have all the information from all the databases. At the very end, here, when it came to the step of elevating the access to the shell, OS shell. So here again, I have been asked about the application or the application language. I supplied PHP, and then I chose to disclose the full path of the directories. I have these directories given to me, so I chose to provide a custom location because I want the temp directory. Probably it is a directory where you will have write access most of the time. So I chose 2, and then after running the tests, I received access denied. So that's also a reason why you cannot have an OS shell. Okay guys, so that was it on SQLmap.